In August 2019, a Mongolian government plane circled twice over the Khenti Mountains and then turned back without landing. The expedition it had been carrying, a joint team of Mongolian, French and American researchers, was told the same thing they had been told 4 times in 12 years. The permit was withdrawn. The site was off-limits. The reason given was, officially, the protection of cultural heritage. The site was the suspected location of the grave of Genghis Khan. There are places on this earth we are not allowed to look at, not by the ordinary rules of trespass, but by direct written orders from governments that in every other matter are perfectly happy to let cameras through. They issue these orders quietly. They renew them every few years. And when researchers ask why, the answer is always some version of the same sentence: that the site is protected, that the tools are insufficient, that the time is not right. The time is never right. What follows are 10 of those places, 10 sealed tombs that no camera crew, no documentary team, and in some cases no archaeologist at all is permitted to enter. Some have been sealed for 30 years, some for 2,000. The reasons given are sometimes plausible, sometimes they are not. And there is one in particular, the last one, where the official reason for the seal is a sentence that, if you read it twice, doesn't quite make sense. I read it 3 times before I noticed. We start with the smallest seal. We end with that sentence. Number 10. The mausoleum of Emperor Taizong of Tang, known as Zhaoling, sits on the northern slope of Mount Jiuzhong in Shaanxi province, about 80 kilometers northwest of Xi'an. It was completed in 649 CE, the year of the emperor's death, and at the time, it was the largest imperial tomb complex in Chinese history. The central chamber is cut directly into the mountain. Around it, on a perimeter of roughly 60 kilometers, are 194 satellite tombs, generals, ministers, foreign princes who had served at the Tang court. Most of those satellite tombs have been excavated over the last 70 years. The central chamber has not. In 1958, a survey team from the Shaanxi Cultural Relics Bureau approached the central mound with the intention of opening it. They were stopped before they reached the entrance. The order came from Premier Zhou Enlai, and it was unambiguous. No Chinese imperial tomb of the first rank would be opened until the technology to preserve its contents had been fully developed. That order has been renewed every Chinese administration since. As of 2024, drilling, ground-penetrating radar surveys, and even surface filming of the central mound itself require special permission that is, in practice, almost never granted. The official reason is conservation. The unofficial reason, according to a remark made by a Beijing University historian in a 2003 internal seminar transcript, is that the tomb's interior diagram, recovered from a Tang-era court document, includes a detail nobody has been able to satisfactorily explain. In the diagram, the chamber walls are described as lined with what the document calls flowing silver, mercury, in other words, the same substance, in the same configuration, that turns up at the very top of this list. The forestry workers stationed at the perimeter of Zhaoling report only one thing of note. The compass needles, in 3 locations on the slope, point steadily 8 degrees off magnetic north. The same 8 degrees every time, regardless of weather. No one has explained it. And before we keep going, you should know, we will come back to those compass readings. Number 9. Beneath the convent of Santo Domingo, in the historic center of Cuzco, Peru, there are corridors that the Peruvian Ministry of Culture has not allowed cameras to enter since 1971. The convent itself sits on top of the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, the central religious complex of the Inca Empire before the Spanish arrival in 1533. The colonial church was built directly on the Inca foundations. In the lower levels, where the Inca masonry is still visible, there are passageways the Spaniards apparently sealed in the 16th century, and that, despite repeated requests from Peruvian and international archaeological teams, have remained sealed. The most persistent of those requests came from the Peruvian archaeologist Anselmo Quiroz, who in 1969 published a brief report describing a low doorway in the lower level, about 90 centimeters tall, framed in the characteristic interlocking polygonal stonework of late Inca construction. Behind the doorway, according to Quiroz, was a corridor that descended at a slight angle, and that he was able to walk along for 43 meters before turning back because of poor air. 2 years after his report appeared, the Ministry of Culture closed the lower levels of the convent to all non-religious access. The official reason is structural. The colonial walls above are unstable, and any movement of air or removal of stones below could compromise the church. The unofficial reason is harder to pin down. There are stories, none of them documentable, of a chamber further down the corridor that local Quechua-speaking guides referred to in 1968 in a single recorded interview as the place of the listening stones. The interviewer, a Belgian ethnographer named Marie-Claire Beaupré, asked the guide to clarify. The guide declined. The corridor Quiroz described has not been entered since. In her 1973 monograph on the Coricancha, Beaupré made one offhand observation that has never quite settled with me. She wrote that the convent's bells, when rung at certain frequencies, seemed to produce a delayed echo from below the floor. Not from the walls of the church, from below it. She noted it as an acoustic curiosity. She did not pursue it. We will come back to this idea, the idea of sound underground, at the very end. Now, before we go further, there is something worth saying about the pattern that begins to form as you read these cases in sequence. They are not, mostly, recent seals. Most of them are decisions that were made decades ago by governments and ministries and committees that have since changed hands many times. But the seals themselves do not change. Whatever the original reason, each successive administration looks at the file, considers reopening it, and decides, quietly, without announcement, to leave it where it is. That decision, repeated across many borders and many decades, is what this list is really about. Number 8. About 40 kilometers northwest of Xi'an, on a flat plain that has not been farmed since 1975, sits a hill that is not, geologically, a hill. It is the tumulus of Emperor Wu of Han, Maoling, completed in 87 BCE, the year of the emperor's death. The mound is roughly 46 meters high, and the base measures about 240 meters on each side. It is, by mass, one of the largest imperial tombs ever built in the ancient world. It has never been opened. Han imperial records describe the burial in unusual detail. According to the records of the Grand Historian, compiled by Sima Qian within a generation of the burial, the central chamber contains, among other things, a model of the empire, rivers, mountains, cities, laid out on a copper and jade floor, with the yellow river represented in Mercury that was meant to flow continuously. The chamber was sealed with a series of locking mechanisms whose operation was, according to Sima Qian, known only to the engineer who built them. That engineer was buried inside it, with the doors closed. 3 Chinese surveys in 1962, 1981, and 2001 have used ground-penetrating radar at the perimeter of the tumulus. All 3 reported anomalies: large rectangular voids, dense metallic readings, and, in 2001, an unusually high concentration of mercury vapor in the soil samples taken from the southern slope. After the 2001 survey, the Central Archaeological Authority of Shaanxi Province issued an internal directive halting all further investigation of the tumulus until preservation technology, and here the directive uses an interesting phrase, until preservation technology can address conditions that are not yet fully understood. That phrase, not yet fully understood, is unusual in Chinese archaeological documentation. Conditions are usually either named or not named. They are rarely flagged as not yet understood, while also remaining unnamed. In a 1983 letter to a colleague at Peking University, the archaeologist Yuan Zhongyi wrote that during the 1981 survey, one of the team members had reported a sound from inside the mound. A sound he described as similar to a distant tuning fork, audible only at a specific point on the southern slope, only at dawn, and only on days when the air was completely still. Yuan, in the letter, said he had not been able to verify the report and considered the team member tired and possibly unreliable. He suggested they keep the observation out of the formal record. It was kept out. The letter, archived in 1997, is the only mention. Here is what is starting to bother me about these cases. The seals themselves are not strange. Governments seal sites all the time. What is strange is the language inside the documents, the recurring phrases that don't quite mean what archaeological language usually means. Conditions not yet fully understood. Place of the listening stones. Flowing silver. These are not the words bureaucracies normally use to describe a problem. They are the words bureaucracies use when they are trying to describe a problem they don't have the right words for. It happens at every site on this list. By the time we reach the top of the list, it will be the only language left. Number 7. In the Tunceli province of eastern Turkey, in a limestone formation about 30 kilometers from the Iranian border, there is a tomb known locally as Adasa. It is small, a single chamber, roughly 7 meters by 5, cut into the rock at some point between the 2nd and 4th centuries CE. It was rediscovered in 1974 by a regional archaeological team led by Mehmet Tekin, a researcher from Hacettepe University in Ankara. The team entered the chamber, took preliminary photographs and samples, and left. Within 16 days, all 4 members of the team had been hospitalized. The official report, filed in early 1975, attributed the illness to a previously undocumented strain of fungal spore, a member of the Aspergillus family, that had been preserved in the sealed chamber for centuries. 2 of the team members recovered after extensive treatment. 1 required a partial lung resection. The 4th, a graduate student named Esin Karaulan, did not recover. She died in February of 1975, 8 weeks after the entry. She was 26. The Turkish Ministry of Culture sealed the Adasa tomb in March 1975. It has not been reopened. Filming inside is not permitted. Filming of the exterior, beyond the perimeter fence, requires written authorization that is granted to journalists roughly once every 5 years. The official reason is biological. The chamber, by that account, contains a still active fungal contaminant whose extraction is not currently safe. The skeptical reading, offered by a 1989 Lancet commentary on the case, is that the fungal explanation does not fully account for the speed and uniformity of the team's collapse. The commentary noted that all 4 team members reported, in their initial hospital interviews, the same specific symptom in the same order: a metallic taste at the back of the throat, beginning roughly 6 hours after exit, followed by a high fever within 12. Aspergillus infections do not, ordinarily, present this way. What was inside the chamber that the 4-person team saw before they left has never been published. The samples they collected were sent to a laboratory in Ankara and, according to a 1981 ministerial inquiry, lost in transit. In a 2008 interview, Mehmet Tekin, by then retired and in his 80s, was asked gently by a Turkish documentary crew whether the chamber contained anything other than the burial itself. He hesitated for some time. Then he said only that the chamber walls had a pattern carved into them that he had not been able to read, and that the pattern, in his view, predated the tomb. That is all he said. He died in 2011. The recording, never broadcast, is held in the documentary's archive. By the way, that detail about the metallic taste, the back of the throat, 6 hours after exit. Hold on to it. It comes up again in a very different context before we reach the top 3. We are 6 entries from the top of the list now. The pattern by this point should be obvious. Each of these sites is officially sealed for a stated reason: conservation, structural concern, biological hazard. And in each case, when the file is examined closely, the stated reason is not quite the whole reason. There is always a phrase, a footnote, an interview, a letter that does not fit. By the time we reach the top 3, there is essentially nothing else left in the file. The stated reasons fall away entirely. And the next entry, number 6, is the one where I first realized that. Number 6. In the city of Cholula, in the Mexican state of Puebla, there is a small Catholic chapel the Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, built in 1594 on top of what the Spanish conquistadors believed was a natural hill. It was not a hill. It was the Great Pyramid of Cholula, the largest pyramid by volume ever constructed by human beings, larger in mass than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Spanish missionaries did not know this when they built the church. By the time they realized, in the 18th century, that the hill was a structure, the church on top of it was already considered sacred ground and could not be moved. The pyramid was first formally surveyed in 1881. It contains, by current estimates, about 8 kilometers of internal tunnels, most of them unexcavated, most of them unmapped. The Mexican Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, the INAH, has conducted partial excavations along the western base since the 1930s. The central chamber, which all available evidence suggests exists somewhere beneath the chapel, has never been reached. Drilling beneath the church has been prohibited since 1956, when a single attempted core sample taken from the courtyard was abandoned within the first 8 meters because, according to the field log, the drill bit returned a sample that did not match any geological layer the surveyors expected at that depth. The sample, like the Adasa specimens, was sent for analysis and, according to the 1957 INAH bulletin, lost during transport. What complicates Cholula is that the pyramid is not the tomb of any individual we know about. The dedications where they survive are to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and the structure was apparently rebuilt at least 6 times over the course of roughly 1,500 years. There may not be a single body inside it. There may be many. The Aztec chronicler, Diego Duran, writing in the 1570s, claimed that the pyramid contained a chamber sealed at the time of the Spanish arrival by the Cholulans themselves, so that what was kept there would not be found by the strangers. Duran did not say what was kept there. He may not have known. In 1971, a small team of geologists, not archaeologists, conducted a magnetic survey of the pyramid's base. They reported a localized magnetic anomaly under the chapel. The anomaly was about the size of a small house. It has not been investigated further. The local Cholulan tradition, which I find more interesting than the geological data, holds that the pyramid was sealed by its own builders before the Aztec period, that the seal predates everything we know about the structure, and that the chamber was already, by the time the Aztecs incorporated the pyramid into their religious geography, considered something not to be opened. In other words, the people who built the layers above the chamber were already treating it as sealed. That, if it's true, makes Cholula the oldest entry on this list by a wide margin. Older than the seal of Maoling, older than the seal of Zhaoling, possibly older than writing. Number 5. There may be no tomb in history more searched for and less found than the tomb of Alexander the Great. Alexander died in Babylon in June of 323 BCE. His body was, according to the historian Diodorus Siculus, embalmed in honey and transported in a gold sarcophagus to Egypt, where it became the centerpiece of a mausoleum in the newly founded city of Alexandria. For roughly 600 years, that mausoleum, the Soma, was a recognized monument. Roman emperors visited it. Augustus reportedly knocked off a piece of Alexander's nose by accident in 30 BCE. The location was known. And then, sometime in the late 4th century CE, it disappears from the record. Earthquakes, the rise of Christianity, the rebuilding of Alexandria's street grid. Some combination of these things buried the Soma, and from the 5th century onward, it is gone. Or more precisely, it is officially gone. There have been at least 140 serious attempts to locate the tomb in the modern era. The Egyptian government has, since 1995, classified the central section of Alexandria, a roughly 15-block area in the Latin Quarter, as restricted for excavation. The official reason is the density of modern construction above. The unofficial reason, given by an Egyptian archaeologist named Hala Mohsen in a 2014 panel that was not formally recorded, is that earlier surveys identified at least one substantial subsurface void in the restricted zone, and that the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities determined, in 1997, that the void should not be opened until the security situation in Alexandria stabilized. The security situation has not stabilized. The void has not been opened. What makes the Alexandria case unusual is that, unlike most of the tombs on this list, the seal here is not over the tomb itself. It is over the search for the tomb. You are not allowed to look. The Polish archaeologist Andrzej Chudak, who proposed an extensive ground-penetrating radar survey of the Latin Quarter in 2009, was denied permission 3 times. He has since stopped publishing on the subject. In a private letter to a colleague, dated October 2011, he wrote that he had been told, off the record, that the survey was not refused, it was deferred, and that the deferral, he had come to understand, was effectively permanent. There is a particular detail from the Chudak proposal that I keep coming back to. In his preliminary survey, conducted in 2008 with a small handheld unit, Chudak reported that one corner of the suspected void produced an unusual return, a series of regular, evenly spaced echoes, which he interpreted as either a deliberately constructed acoustic feature or, more likely, an artifact of the equipment. He noted the readings and moved on. The phrase, regular, evenly spaced echoes, appears almost word for word in a different report on this list, a report you have not yet heard about. It is the report on the final entry, the entry at number 1. When I noticed the overlap, I went back and read both reports a second time. The wording is not identical, the pattern is. Number 4. About 35 kilometers east of Xi'an, beneath a forested mound on the slope of Mount Li, lies the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of unified China. He died in 210 BCE. His tomb is one of the most famous in the world, mostly because of the 8,000 terracotta soldiers buried in pits about a kilometer to the east of the central mound. Those pits have been excavated slowly and continuously since 1974. The central mound itself, where the emperor is buried, has never been opened. It has never been opened because the Chinese government has explicitly forbidden it. The reason is Mercury. Sima Qian, the same historian who described the Maoling burial, wrote that the tomb of Qin Shi Huang contains rivers of liquid mercury, mechanically circulated to represent the rivers of the empire. For a long time, this was assumed to be poetic exaggeration. Then, in 1981, a Chinese scientific team conducted a soil mercury survey of the central mound. The results, published in the journal Archaeometry in 2003, showed mercury concentrations in the soil over the mound between 200 and 280 parts per million. Background mercury in the surrounding soil is roughly 30 parts per million. The mercury is concentrated specifically in a pattern that, when mapped, resembles a coiled river system. The 2003 paper, by a team led by the Chinese geochemist Wang Xueli, was the public confirmation that Sima Qian's account was, in at least one specific detail, accurate. After the paper appeared, the Chinese State Administration of Cultural Heritage formally extended the existing prohibition on excavation of the central mound and added an explicit clause prohibiting any drilling, including for sampling, that would penetrate the mound's clay ceiling layer. The official reason is straightforward. Opening the mound would release a quantity of mercury vapor likely to contaminate the surrounding region. The technical solution, a sealed extraction structure built around the mound, has been discussed since the late 1990s and has never been funded. Most archaeologists I have read on this subject suspect it never will be. What is rarely discussed in the public-facing material is what else the 1981 and 2001 surveys detected. The mercury pattern is the headline. Underneath it, both surveys reported strong metallic returns consistent with the bronze and jade fittings Sima Qian described. They also reported what the 2001 survey called regular geometric voids, arranged in a pattern that did not match any known imperial tomb layout. The 2001 paper described these voids as probably representing additional chambers, possibly storage. It did not speculate further. In 2011, a Chinese physicist named Liu Zhenhua, who had not been part of the survey team, published a short comment in a Beijing engineering journal, noting that the geometric pattern of the voids, when projected onto a north-south axis, corresponded almost exactly to the layout of certain Han-era astronomical instruments. Specifically, instruments designed to track celestial bodies that, in 210 BCE, had not yet been formally catalogued. His comment was noted and not pursued. We are about to leave the lower entries behind, and the texture of these cases changes from here. The first 6 entries are seals that are almost defensible. There are stated reasons that, while incomplete, are at least proportionate. The top 3 are different. The top 3 are seals where the stated reason has stopped pretending, where the language of the file admits, in one form or another, that something is not understood, where the words preservation and biological have given way to phrases that, when you read them aloud, sound like the kind of thing you would say if you were trying very hard not to say something else. The next 3 entries are those entries. Number 3. Somewhere in the Khenti Mountains of northeastern Mongolia, in a region the Mongolian government has designated the Great Taboo, there is, by all reasonable historical accounts, the unmarked grave of Genghis Khan. He died in August of 1227, somewhere on a campaign in northwestern China. His body was carried back across the Gobi Desert by a small detachment of his most trusted soldiers. According to the Mongolian chronicler Rashid al-Din, writing about 100 years later, the funeral procession killed every person it encountered on its return journey, to keep the location of the eventual burial a secret. After the burial, the soldiers themselves were killed. According to one version, 1,000 horses were ridden over the grave to obscure it. According to another, a river was diverted to flow over the burial. According to a third, both. 800 years later, the location is still officially unknown. It is unknown because the Mongolian government has, since 2009, formally prohibited archaeological investigation of the Khenti region. The prohibition is administered by the Center for Cultural Heritage of Mongolia and renewed every 5 years. International expeditions, most notably the 2002 University of Chicago expedition led by John Woods, the 2008 Smithsonian expedition, and the 2015 expedition of Albert Lin, have all been wound down or denied permits to expand. Lin's team, which used non-invasive satellite imaging methods, identified about 55 candidate sites in the protected zone. None of them has been ground-truthed. None of them ever will be under current policy. The official reason is cultural. The grave of Genghis Khan, in Mongolian tradition, is sacred. Disturbing it is, by traditional belief, an act that would bring catastrophe to the nation. This belief is widely shared in Mongolian society and is by itself a sufficient reason for the prohibition. I want to be clear about that. The cultural reason is real, and it is sufficient. But the cultural reason is not the only reason given. In 2011, a deputy minister of culture named Bayar Munk, in a parliamentary briefing whose transcript was leaked the following year, addressed the question of the prohibition directly. He said the cultural argument, but he also said something else. He said the satellite work conducted by the Lin expedition had returned, at 3 of the candidate sites, what he called non-archaeological readings. Readings that did not correspond to known burial structures, known geological features, or any other known signature. He did not elaborate. The phrase non-archaeological readings appears nowhere else in the parliamentary record. When asked in a follow-up question what he meant, the deputy minister said he had been advised not to elaborate. The session moved on. Lin's team, when contacted, would not comment on the readings. Now, back to the cold open. The plane that turned back over the Khenti Mountains in August of 2019 was carrying, among other people, a former member of Lin's team. According to a 2020 article in a Mongolian language daily, the team member had returned, off the record, to attempt to revisit one of the 3 flagged sites. The plane was diverted at the request of the Cultural Ministry. The team member, when asked about the trip on his return, said he had been able to fly over the site twice. He had seen something at it. He would not say what. he would not say what. That phrase, non-archaeological readings, bothers me more the longer I think about it. It is the kind of phrase a bureaucracy uses when the readings exist, but the bureaucracy has not decided what to call them. We have one phrase like that left to encounter. It is in the file for the entry at number 1. It is worse. Number 2. I want to spend a little time on number 2 because it is the entry that, more than any other on this list, prepares the ground for number 1. The two are physically connected. They are in the same building. They were sealed at the same time. And the seal of one is, in a strange way, the explanation for the seal of the other. The Padmanabhaswamy Temple, in Thiruvananthapuram, on the southwestern coast of India, is one of the oldest and richest functioning temples in the world. It has stood, in something like its current form, since at least the 8th century CE. The temple's underground complex consists of 6 chambers, designated A through F. Each is sealed, and has been sealed for as long as anyone can verify. None of the chambers have been opened in living memory until in 2011, the Supreme Court of India ordered an inventory of the temple's contents. 5 of the 6 chambers were opened that year. The chamber I want to talk about now, Vault A, was the first to be opened in late June of 2011 by a court-appointed committee under heavy police escort. What the committee found inside, by their own reports, was the largest single collection of unaccounted-for treasure in modern history. Gold coins from the Roman, Mughal, and East India Company periods, diamonds the size of children's fists, idols cast in solid gold. By a 2012 estimate, the contents of Vault A alone were valued at approximately $22 billion United States dollars. Subsequent estimates, including the contents of Vaults B through F, raised the figure to over $1 trillion. It is, with reasonable confidence, the wealthiest single chamber ever opened by a court order anywhere in the world. You would think this would be the sealed tomb. It is not. What is interesting about Vault A is the procedure of the opening. The committee, before entering, conducted a sound survey of the door. The Standing Committee report, page 17, describes a regular, evenly spaced echo pattern produced when the door was tapped. That phrase, regular, evenly spaced echoes, is the phrase Andrzej Chudak used about Alexandria's Latin Quarter 3 years earlier, on the other side of the world. The phrase again is not unique, but the description is. The committee's acoustic engineer, an Indian engineer named Ravi Pillai, noted in his appendix that the echo pattern of Vault A's door had a periodicity of roughly 740 milliseconds. He noted that this corresponded, within a small margin, to the natural resonance of a particular chamber size and material, a chamber specifically of about the dimensions and stone type of the lower vaults. He noted in passing that the next door, the door to Vault B, produced a different echo pattern entirely. He did not describe the second pattern in the appendix. The opening of Vault A took 11 hours. The temple's traditional custodians, the Travancore royal family, objected to the opening throughout. They cited, among other things, a long-standing tradition that the doors of the temple's lower vaults had been sealed by an act of religious ritual, and that opening them in the wrong order, or by the wrong people, or with the wrong rites, would constitute a violation of the temple's sanctity. After Vault A was opened, the committee turned to Vault B. That is when the temple's custodians stopped objecting to the procedure and started objecting to its very possibility. That brings us to number 1. Number 1. The door to Vault B of the Padmanabhaswamy Temple has not been opened in living memory. It has not been opened, by any record we have, in centuries. It is sealed by a heavy iron crossbar, and the crossbar is held in place by what the 2011 committee described, in its formal report, as an unidentified mechanism, possibly mechanical, possibly ritual. The committee was unable, in 2011, to determine which. The Supreme Court of India was scheduled to authorize the opening of Vault B in July of 2011. The opening did not happen. It did not happen because the temple's custodians, joined within a few days by a coalition of religious authorities from across India, filed an emergency petition arguing that the opening of Vault B specifically was forbidden. not in the sense that opening it was discouraged, but in the sense that it could not be opened safely by ordinary means. The petition cited an ancient temple tradition that the door of Vault B had been sealed, in the 8th century, by a ritual practice known as a Naga Bandham, literally, a serpent binding. A Naga Bandham, in the surviving descriptions, is not a physical lock. It is, in the temple's own theological language, a closure performed by sound. A specific sequence of mantric chants, performed in the correct order and at the correct pitch, was said to seal the door so that it could only be reopened by the same sequence, in reverse. Anyone attempting to open the door without performing the reverse sequence, the petition stated, would face consequences of a nature that the temple does not have language to describe in the courtroom. This is the petition's actual phrase. It is in the public record. The Supreme Court of India accepted it. In July of 2011, the court suspended the order to open Vault B. The suspension has been renewed, in essence, ever since. As of 2024, Vault B is the only one of the 6 vaults that has not been opened. There is no public timetable for its opening. In a 2015 hearing, the court asked the Travancore custodians whether they could perform the reverse sequence, the unsealing chant, themselves. The senior custodian, an elderly priest named Marthanda Varma, told the court that the chant required for the reverse sequence had been lost. He believed it had been preserved, in writing, only in a single manuscript held inside Vault B. This is the part that has stayed with me. The chant required to open the door is, according to the temple's own tradition, on the other side of the door, it would open. The 2011 committee, before halting its work, conducted one final acoustic survey of the door. The Indian engineer Ravi Pillai, the same engineer whose report on Vault A I mentioned earlier, recorded the door's response to a series of tone tests. His appendix on Vault B is a single page. It contains one sentence and one figure. The sentence reads in full: "The door produces, in response to specific tones, a regular, evenly spaced echo pattern of unidentified origin." That phrase, regular, evenly spaced echo. It appeared in Chudak's Alexandria report. It appeared in Pillai's Vault A appendix. It appears here, in the file for Vault B, with one additional word: unidentified origin. What I keep coming back to is what Marie-Claire Beaupré wrote in her 1973 monograph about the bells of Santo Domingo in Cuzco. She noted that the convent's bells, rung at certain frequencies, produced a delayed echo from below the floor. She noted it as a curiosity. The Quechua guide she had interviewed 5 years earlier had called the chamber below the place of the listening stones. He had declined to clarify. She had not pursued it. Vault B, the Coricancha, the Latin Quarter of Alexandria, the southern slope of Maoling. 4 sites on this list, 4 reports, 4 times the same pattern of regular, evenly spaced echoes recorded near a sealed underground chamber. 4 different countries, 4 different centuries of original construction. No common builder, no common script, no common religion. The compass needles at Zhaoling read 8 degrees off magnetic north. The metallic taste at the back of the throat at Adasa, 6 hours after exit. The Han astronomical instruments under Qin Shi Huang's mound, designed for stars not yet catalogued. The non-archaeological readings at 3 sites in the Kentii. The chamber at Cholula, sealed before the Aztecs arrived. I do not know what these are. I'm not telling you that I know. But I know that someone in each of these places decided not to look. And I know that the next person, when they arrived at the file, decided the same. And the next. And the next. And one of those decisions, the most recent, was a Supreme Court order based on a sealed door whose key is, allegedly, on the other side of the door it locks. The door is still closed. The bells in Cuzco still ring on Sundays. The forestry workers at Zhaoling still walk their patrols. The chapel in Cholula still holds its services on top of a hill that is not a hill. The plain over the Kentii still turns back. And somewhere, in the lower levels of a temple on the southwestern coast of India, a door whose origin no one alive can verify, continues to produce, in response to specific tones, a regular, evenly spaced echo from a chamber that, by every available record, has not been opened in 800 years. The records say so. The records have always said so.